continue on with the white blood cells and immunology. So what are the two different divisions that we have that I want you guys to remember? Well, there's innate immunity, which is inherent to yourself. It's innate. And then you have adaptive. And so what is the difference between the two? Adaptive. Okay, so what's the difference between the two? Well, there's a really good example. When Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, some of you might remember this, some of you don't. There's always Google. So essentially, Hurricane Katrina hit and it flooded all of New Orleans. And so there was mass chaos and mass rioting. And the police that were there, they were there first, right? They were there first, they were everywhere, and they were trying to defend and protect the area, but there was too much rioting and it overwhelmed the system. So they couldn't do anything. And they had to wait. How long did they wait before the military came in? Well, about a week. Let's say that it's a week. It might have been a little bit sooner, but let's say they waited about a week for the military to come in. As soon as the military got there, what happened? Boom, all the chaos stopped. Why? Because military will shoot you, right? Martial law, military enforcement, they hit hard, done. The infection is gone. So let's compare the innate immunity with the adaptive immunity. Innate, kind of like the police, they're there first and their first line defense, but if the infection is too great for them, they can't deal with it, they have to wait. So who's coming in to save the day? The military, right? So what does the military do? Well, the military comes in, they come in strong, they come in hard, they come in forceful, and they have a lot of memory to what's going on. So they remember fighting somewhere else, right? So the difference between innate and adaptive primarily is that cells associated with adaptive immunity have memory cells. And these memory cells allow them to attack stronger. Let's say that for myself, I ate salmon, and the next time I ate salmon, I developed a rash. Couldn't figure out why. So I ate salmon again. I had another rash and it got even worse. So my allergic reaction to salmon the first time, I might not have noticed anything, or maybe I had a very small reaction, but the second time that I ate it, the reaction was much greater. So my immune system was working much harder. It had memory cells that said, hey, this is a foreign substance that we don't like. We're going to attack it. So police versus military, present already, but not as strong. Military, they're not there all the time, but when they come in full force. They're extremely strong. They're very effective. And what cells are associated with adaptive? Well, we already said B cells and T cells were associated with adaptive immunity. What is innate then? Well, innate is everything else. We went through all of these. So first line defense, let's simplify this. First line defense includes skin and all the other barriers like mucous membranes, but we're going to simplify down to skin and barriers. What is second line defense? Well, second line defense are all the cells associated with innate immunity, and that includes never monkeys eat bananas, right? 60-30, 6-3-1. And then of the lymphocytes, you notice that I don't have natural killers there. We're going to classify natural killers here because they don't have memory cells. So we're going to group them in with innate immunity. On top of that, we want to complement this pathway. So we're going to have something that's called complement cascade. And complement cascade has two systems I'm going to tell you to remember that mimic some of the effects that B cells and T cells will do. And we'll cover and address this a little bit later. In addition to this, in general, innate immunity has what we call inflammation, right? So inflammation itself is the process of being able to bring the white blood cells to the area. And what is inflammation? Four cardinal signs of inflammation are herpes. So what is herpes? It's a viral infection, right? That you get somewhere? No. Okay, so yes, that is, but this is a mnemonic, and it's going to help you remember what the four signs of inflammation are. It's heat, redness, pain, and swelling. Well, how does that relate back to innate immunity? Well, inflammation allows heat, redness means that there's increased blood flow to the area. Pain and swelling are just the result of tissue, an increase in the amount of fluid that's moving into the tissue. The swelling itself can lead to pain. So heat, redness, pain, and swelling are all related to histamine release. So histamine causes vasodilation, opens up the blood vessels so blood can shunt to the area, but it also opens the doors. We call that permeability. If I open more doors, that means that the tissue is more permeable. So if I say that class is over and there's 10 doors and I open all 10 doors, that means you have an increase in permeability and the students are able to flow out or flow back in. That's how inflammation works. And what are the cells that would flow in with the fluid? Well, the cells would be neutrophils, monocytes, eosinophils, basophils, anything with complement cascade, and we'll talk about that shortly. So one more time, who's the police? Innate. Who's the military? Adaptive. And which one has memory cells? Well, adaptive has memory cells. And what are the two different cell types for adaptive immunity? And that's going to be B cells and T cells. Well, let's add to that. Let's make it a little bit harder because this is too easy for you guys, right? I'm going to go a little bit slower. No, I don't. Deal with it. Enjoy me, love me, or don't. Turn me off. Okay, so I have B cells. B cells are what we call humoral immunity. And adaptive immunity, it's like a catch-all. It's like saying military, and then you have the officers, and then you have the enlisted. Well, let's classify these guys and separate them as well. So T cells are associated with cell-mediated response. That means they physically will link up to a cell to either destroy the cell or help the cell by grabbing onto whatever the cell is trying to present to him and then sharing it with the world or sharing it with the other white blood cells to encourage them to help fight the infection. So one more time, let's classify. We have police, and that's the innate immunity. We have military, that's adaptive. And then under adaptive, we have B cells, that's also known as humoral immunity. T cells are also known as cell-mediated immunity. Woohoo! Doing good, guys. So this is, you guys can review that. That's boring stuff. So I said police, they're fast response. They're there first. They're everywhere, kind of like neutrophils, right? Adaptive immunity is the military, big guns, slower to mobilize, but they're very, 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 very specific. They have memory, and they're much, much stronger. So first line of defense, you guys can slow down through that. Adaptive immunity versus innate. Let's have fun with a few more things. So granulocytes, this is just to help you guys remember the difference between the two. And granulocytes and agranulocytes. This is just for definitions. Big Ben grandfather clock. So the Big Ben grandfather clock, where? In England? The Big Ben grandfather clock. So granulocytes means that there are granules. And what kind of granules might we find in basophils or eosinophils or neutrophils? Didn't we say neutrophils? We have cytokines, right? Cytokines are just a general term for chemicals, so we're not going to specify that. But basophils we did. We said there were two. We said that basophils were similar to mast cells in that they release histamine, and they also release heparin, right? And then eosinophils are associated with allergic reactions. So these have granules, so they're called granulocytes. If these are the three of five, what are the two that are considered agranulocytes? Hey, Granny, get over here. So we have lymphocytes and monocytes. So lymphocytes and monocytes do not have granules for release, but these three do have granules and different chemicals that they can't release. Dendritic cells. Okay, so let's start adaptive immunity. What is adaptive? B cells and T cells. And how does it work? Let's start off with T cell and how T cells are considered adaptive. How did they adapt to the situation? Well, they have memory cells. So in addition to triggering different events, blah, 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 I have two different types. I have T helper cells and I have cytotoxic T cells. And how we're going to remember this is on top of your cytotoxic T cells and on top of your T helper cells, there's markers. It's like my marker, if you see me from the back, I'm a brunette, right? So you don't see anything else, you might just see the hair. So that's a tag or a marker to say, okay, there's a blonde, there's a girl with blue hair, there's a girl with pink hair, there's a guy with spikes that are green, there's a guy with spikes that are silver. So you can recognize the markers and say, okay, now I'm going to tag these people, and the ones that I tag and maybe the markers that I see, I'm going to send somebody else to go over and, I don't know, beat them up or like eat them, whatever. But T helper cells have what we call CD4. Don't worry what CD stands for. I had to look it up and I was like, okay, I memorized it. So I'm going to tell you for those of you that need to know what it is. It just stands for cluster designation. It's a marker. That wasn't worth it, right? So I have CD4 cells and I have CD8. Well, in addition to just those, you think that's the only cell surface marker there are on cells? No, there's not. There's way more. So on all cells, every single cell in the, oh, I'm going to match it up. On all cells, every single cell in the body except for red blood cells, you have what we call MHC class 1. In terms of medicine, these are called HLA 1, type 1. And they're the same thing. Just remember it's class 1. And then we have this thing called antigen presenting cells. And antigen presenting cells are a little bit dumb. There's 3 that present. And so these are called MHC. They have a tag on them called MHC class 2. Same thing in medicine. It's called HLA type 2. And so let's do this one first. Let's say that I go to Kentucky Fried Chicken and I'm like, oh my goodness, this chicken is so good, and I devour all of the chicken. And I can't speak, so I'm muted. I'm not able to write, I'm not able to communicate in any other way except giving this chicken to someone else and say, and essentially I'm telling you, here's the chicken, go and find it for yourself. It's really good. You have to devour it and destroy it. So here we go. If I'm presenting something to you and my job is to present to you, are you going to respond to me and destroy me? No. So the goal of antigen presenting cells is to present. So let's say that it's one of these 3 types of cells. And the 3 types of cells are dendritic cells, or macrophages, which are big eaters anyway, right? Or even B cells that assist in macrophage activity. So these 3 will devour a bacteria, break up some of the components and the proteins, right, that they find in the bacteria, stick it on their MHC class 2 receptor and go, hey, somebody help me. So then they bind with what we call TH, or T helper cells. And how do I remember that CD4 will bind with MHC class 2? Well, it's a simple math problem. 4 times 2 equals 8. So I know that they pair up. So any antigen presenting cells will get assistance and help from CD4 cells that are otherwise known as T helper cells. Well, how does that relate then between CD8, which are also known as cytotoxic T cells, and all cells that have this MHC class 1 marker? Well, these guys ate bacteria and they're presenting it to the helpers for assistance. What about these guys? Well, there's a difference. These guys got infected by a virus. Do I want to keep a cell that's infected by a virus? No, I don't, because the cell itself, if it has a virus, the virus is going to self-replicate, and then it's going to spit out all these little virons, and then they're going to be spreading throughout the body. So no, your job, you want to destroy it, right? If it has a virus, you're going to destroy it. How are you going to destroy it? You're going to spit at it, poke holes. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that cytotoxic T cells will kill virus-infected cells or even tumor cells. And how they do that is they can spit out things called granzymes. And granzymes are like enzymes that will digest the cell. The other way that they can do it is they can punch holes. So we're going to say they can use perforin, to punch holes. If I punch holes in a cell, there's water on the outside. The water will leak into the cell. That'll cause rupture and lysis of the cell. So perforin leads to lysis and killing of the cell. So we're going to say CD8 cells will attack and bind to virus-infected cells that have an MHC class 1 marker on them. How do you remember that CD8 cells and MHC class 1 match up together? Well, 8 times 1 equals magic number 8. So here we go. Here's the pattern. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 1 is 8. So that's how I know CD4 cells and MHC class 2 cells bind up. But does it mean that these antigen-presenting cells don't have a marker 1 on them? They do. So if they are infected by a virus, then CD8 cells or cytotoxic T cells are going to come in and they're going to destroy the cell that has a virus in it. So when we're saying antigen presenting, we're saying if it's doing its job, I'm not going to hurt it. But if it's infected by a virus, we got to kill it. So how does this your helpers and your cytotoxic T cells, which covers essentially all the T cell stuff that I want you to remember. How does that relate back to B cells? And then we'll continue on with more information without having to draw on the board after we've already finalized this. Well, T helper cells have two major types that we are covering, Th1 and Th2. So Th1 stimulates macrophage maturation and activity. So that means it tells the big eaters to eat. Well, here we go. Here's some chicken, big eater. Find the chicken and eat it. Okay, so now Th1 encourages macrophages to be activated so that they can help devour the infection. Makes sense. Th2, on the other hand, will stimulate conversion and activation of B cells to their activated form, which is called plasma cells. And plasma cells will now secrete antibodies. Oh, definitions. Okay, what's an antibody? What's an antigen? I don't remember what it is. Okay, antibody is made by my body. An antigen generates the antibody. So an antigen is a foreign substance. Antigen is the thing that we want to attack. An antibody is made by my body. And there are 5 antibodies that are made. And let's erase this. So you guys have this in memory. We're going to go straight to antibody and we'll talk about the 5 different isotypes. This is fun, right? Yay! Okay. And then we'll follow through on the slides and just kind of talk our way through the rest of the slides, and we're done with immunology, at least the basics for immunology, and kind of getting it organized. So here we go. How do I stimulate and trigger? So Th2, that's not the only way that I can trigger B cell activity, but this is one way, and we're going to focus on this. So plasma cells are made from B cells, so they are an activated form of B cells. They're stimulated one way by Th2 encouragement, because how do we remember it's Th2? Well, the second letter in the alphabet is B. So Th2 relates to B cells, activates them, converts them to plasma cells, which then release antibodies, also known as immunoglobulins. So I'm going to write out the word immunoglobulin. And what are immunoglobulins? They're tags. So we're going to keep it as simple as a tag. They're going to tag the structure so let's say that there's 5 red heads, 5 green heads, and 5 orange heads. So I tag all the orange heads, right? And I tag them with an antibody. And I call my friend Mac. Mac is a big eater. So he comes in and he macrophages all 5 of the orange guys. That's what tag is. Tag is like saying, tag, you're it, right? And then running away and having somebody else go and do your dirty work. And what are the 5? They're gained. And let's start off with the one that's most fun. It's all about me. So me first. With acute infection or initial infection, you're going to see an elevation in IgM. So these are IGs. So this is IgG, IgA, IgM, IgE, IgD, IgG. Okay, so you get the point, right? So IgM, you see, with initial infection or acute stage, it tends to be elevated first. If you have a secondary infection or it's chronic, that means it lasts for longer than a couple of weeks or even months, you might see go second, right? So go chronic. So you're like, go chronic, go second, go after me. So as the disease progresses from the acute phase into the chronic phase, you're going to see an elevation in IgG. And this also can be a second infection. Oh, that's pretty easy, right? So IgG, IgM are done. Me first, acute or initial. Go chronic, go second is second infection or chronic. And then A is pretty easy. It's just TEARS. So you see it in your tears, you see it in your secretions. And then what about this? IgE. Well, IgE is allergy. So you might see it with allergies. And then IgD, I still don't know. All I know is that somehow it's bound to a B cell. There's 2. There's like IgM and IgD that are bound. But I don't know. If you look up a lot of different websites, they're still kind of speculating what it is. So for you guys, don't know. All I know is that maybe it's bound to the B cell, but still don't know what the function is. Let's get back to the material. So, dendritic cells, antigen-presenting cells, what were the three? Dendritic, macrophage, and B cell. And what do? They present the antigen or the foreign substance to who? T helper cells. And what are the two different types of T helper cells? We said the two T helper cells were Th1 and Th2. And Th1 stimulated macrophage to be big eaters, right? Th2 helped out with all of this, plasma cells, and it made an antibody, which usually has this Y shape to it. So this is an antibody, right? And it's a Y shape. And there are 5 antibodies that you guys need to know are immunoglobulins. And those are gamed, G-A-M-E-D. And you guys can memorize this or go back. So MHC class 1 found in all cells. MHC class 2 only found in antigen-presenting cells, right? And then this would be a breakdown and show you, okay, so we said if it's MHC class 1 and it's infected by a virus, do I want to keep it or destroy it? No, I destroy it. How do I destroy it? With CD8. So 1 times 8 is 8. So I know that I cause cell death. I destroy whatever viral infected cell I have. But these guys, look, it's a B cell, it's a macrophage, and they might be doing their job, right? So they're class 2, and they're a little dumb, but they're doing their job. They're being good. So 2 times 4, CD4 cells or T helper cells will help by activating, right? Activation to kill intestinal parasites and parasites. So they're basically helping, not destroying. And types of T cells, we went over this. Th1 activates macrophages. Th2 activates B cells, right, to encourage the conversion of B cells to plasma cells. So again, here we go. You guys can slow down through that. Cytotoxic T cells or CD8 cells. You can slow through this, and then this just helps you separate the two. So a lot of times when it comes to textbooks or when you're trying to figure out what's going on, I have a little dot right there. They don't often organize it in a way that is approachable, or you can go back and figure out, okay, let's group this together. So here's what I like to do. Cell-mediated and humoral are considered adaptive immunity, right? So this is grouped under here. And innate immunity is everything other than adaptive, right? Anything that's initial that doesn't have memory cells. So what do I want to show you guys now is this. There is a complement cascade, and its job is to complement, right? So how does it complement and who does it mimic? Let's do a review. What is the function of B cells? Once B cells are activated, they release antibodies. And what do antibodies do? They tag. They say, tag your it. Go and eat the structure that I just tagged. So B cells, and we're keeping it as B cells. You guys know that this is plasma cells. And then how did T cells? What did T cells do? Well, T cells, specifically CD8, I'll just write plasma for you guys. CD8 cells will do what? They'll punch holes, right? How did they punch holes? They punch holes with perforin. So perforin punches holes. And what do holes do? Holes lead to lysis and cell death. So with tagging, yeah, it'll lead to death, but death by something else, right? So complement. Complement does 3 main things. So the first thing that it does is it copies the tag. And how does it tag? Well, it uses C3PO from Star Wars. No, I'm joking. It's just C3b. And C3b is what we call an opsonin. And opsonin just means tag. So it mimics and complements, that's its whole point. It's a group of proteins that complement the effects of other systems. So it complements B cells by tagging structures for destruction. Now, T cell, I gotta mimic this somehow. So I'm gonna make it a big MAC attack, right? So I have something called the MAC attack, membrane attack complex. And what's it gonna do? It's gonna MAC attack. How does it MAC attack? It punches holes using membrane attack complexes, which essentially different proteins will set up into huge holes, and then it'll trigger lysis and death. In addition to that, complement will release something that is associated with inflammation. So 3 things that it does is it opsonizes or tags, it makes holes for lysis, and it causes inflammation. What are the 4 signs of inflammation? Herpes, H, R, P, and S. So moving on to inflammation. What is inflammation? Herpes, H, R, P, S. So you say, you know that histamine is associated with vasodilation and increased permeability. Pain can be from the pressure because of the swelling, but it can also be from cytokine release. So acute inflammation, you guys can take a look at this. If I look at this, acute inflammation, a lot of times you have neutrophil involvement, you have heat, redness, pain, and swelling, inflammatory process, and permeability. So that's some things to look at. Complement C3b. What is C3b? C3b is opsin and tag your it. Histamine, what does that do? It vasodilates, so it increases blood flow to the area, and it also increases permeability. So this is what permeability means. If I have a blood vessel and I make it wider, that means I have more blood flow to the area. But more blood flow to the area doesn't mean that I'm going to get it to tissues. The only way I can get it to tissues is if I make the holes to the tissues bigger. Making the holes bigger is essentially increasing permeability, so it allows fluid to move from the blood vessel out into the interstitium, also known as the tissue space. Okay, and so what else do we have? We have chronic inflammation, macrophage involvement, protein breakdown, right? Local versus systemic, you guys can look at that. TNF alpha is associated with inflammation. Plus, you have fever, neutrophils, so an increase in the number of neutrophils, right? So this might be what kind of infection? What do we say? If you have an elevation in neutrophil, it might be a bacterial infection. What about it's fungi? So if it's a fungal infection, what might you have elevated? Maybe monocytes. What about allergies and parasites and autoimmune? What was that? We said that was eosinophils. And then what about virus? Why would I say virus? Well, CD8 cells destroy viruses. So if you have an increase in the number of T cells, then you might have an increase in the amount of viruses that are present in your body. So you're fighting a viral infection. Woo, woo, woo. Disease case studies, this is actually for another group, but there you go, there you have it.